Hi everyone, I'm Frank Clifford at the London School of Astrology. This is a series of interviews with expert astrologers to discover how they approach client work and how they actually prioritize, synthesize, and interpret birth charts. We'll also discover how they go about communicating that information to their clients. Each session will introduce the astrologer's approach, and then we'll be looking at a chart or two with them to see this approach in practice. Each master astrologer is giving their time for an important cause, and the LSA is donating £150 per session to the charity selected by the astrologer. Our guest today, Rod Suskin, has chosen Tusk, a conservation charity based in Africa that aims to protect endangered species, preserve habitats, and combat the illegal wildlife trade. So let me introduce you to Rod. Rod Suskin is a well-known figure in astrology and has been in practice as an astrologer and healer for over 30 years. I hope I'm getting all this right, Rod. His interest, his interest in traditional medicine led him to lecturing at various universities in South Africa too. He runs the Rod Suskin School of Astrology, a 3-year professional training course in astrology in Cape Town, covering both traditional and modern perspectives, and many astrologers of note have studied there. Rod also has a weekly show on TV and YouTube, Rod Suskin's World. I think that's what it's called. Rod has also found the time to write a number of books, including Soul Life, Cycles of Life, and a book on astrology of relationships called Synastry. So a warm welcome, Rod. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, Frank. It's a great privilege to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, thank you. Thank you. So can you give us an idea at the start of the division of your time? Is it 50-50 with clients and teaching? Is it writing? How does your week look?
It's always been predominantly clients. Over the years, I've scaled that down more and more and more as I've gotten older. But it's still predominantly clients. I teach, I see clients every day, 5 days a week, one way or the other. As I've scaled that down, I've tried to make it less, but I've always been very busy. I planned my practice on my progressed moon, hitting my ascendant on the button, and it worked. It made me very in the public eye right from the beginning. So I've always had to deal with that and teach 3 nights a week. At the moment, it's heading for 50-50. I think I'm aiming towards mostly teaching.
Right, right. And what inspires you about teaching? Is it the next generation? Is it a compulsion that we all have?
I think it's both. Astrology is the type of thing that if we look at our ancient traditions where it was passed on from a master to a student orally or in an apprenticeship, it comes with the territory. It's like you have a responsibility to pass some of it on. So I get particularly excited by beginners. I always feel like I'm teaching them magic, and I see it in their eyes, even online, and it just blows their minds, and I love that. And I also do love the new generation. I've always loved the fact that astrology, after thousands of years, still has an interest. So I get excited when a new generation takes it up, even their own way. Which, having said that, I'm known to be strict as a teacher and then set them free. While they're with me, there's no such thing as your own way. But after that, I encourage it.
Right. Okay. So, speaking of teachers, anybody particularly act as a mentor in your life?
I think that the people who most did, first through their books, were Alan Oaken and Noel Till. Also, Noel, I met quite early on, and he became a bit of a mentor as well. He used to hire these books at me and have animated conversations, and he had a very overpowering style. So he definitely had an influence on me, and I read many of his books when I was young. And Alan Oaken, who I think by the time he and I became friends, I moved on a bit from his book, which is his 60s more spiritual style, which is the early me, because it's like when I'm very young, was the 60s, and I moved on a bit from that. But he was always a great influence as a soul friend, as an astrologer, as my first friend was a professional astrologer. And then Robert Zola was one of my teachers, and a very strong influence in how I do astrology. And then later on, I'd be influenced by Vedic astrology as well. So, but but mostly in terms of direct people, I'd say Zola the most.
Right. And the people you've mentioned are completely different, aren't they? You've got the spiritual
Oh,
aspect, you've got the humanistic, and then you've got
exactly.
traditional. So how does that all come together in what you
Well,
teach?
now that you actually say it, I'm reminded of something that happened when I was at university. When I was studying psychology at university, it quickly became apparent, because it's the way they even teach it, that they're Freudians and they're behaviorists and they're these different people. And I used to think of the person sitting at home who decides to go and see a shrink, looks it up in the yellow pages, doesn't know about behaviorists and psychoanalysts and all of this, and ends up without knowing where they're going. It's someone who's like got a particular view that just might not do it. So that used to worry me tremendously as a student. I asked lecturers about it, no one had an answer. They all thought I was just stupid about that. Just, it's not an issue. And I think what's happened as an astrologer is that I kind of unconsciously became very eclectic to ensure that, I'm adaptable or flexible to, in the end, I guess, to time, because obviously over time, as I got older, I shifted more from one way of doing astrology to another. So my humanistic, spiritual, psychological, and I've got a degree in psychology as well, all is very much the first half of my life until I studied Vedic astrology. Then when I went to India and did Vedic astrology there, and I suddenly thought like I'd wasted half my life. But when I came back, it was just at the time that the three Roberts had started the recovery of the tradition, and John Frawley was now writing about the more recent tradition. And that had a very strong effect on me, because I was looking for the precision and specificness of Vedic astrology, and I was looking for the connection to the soul, which I found, again, an issue in Western astrology, because there are too many different worldviews, and who knows what your client's one is, and how are you to impose yours on them? And so that was a problem for me. But in India, of course, they've all got a similar worldview, because astrology is so integrated into their spiritual lives. And I was looking for that, and I found more of that in the tradition. So I became more and more traditional as I got older, the second half of my practice.
So when clients come to see you, they don't probably just pick up the yellow pages and pick like a psychiatrist, as you say. So
Yes.
what do they expect? I mean, not what they expect, because they could expect a whole range of things. But what do they encounter when you describe what you do, and how is that set up for them?
Well, what I do think, also coming from the tradition and probably most modern views as well, is that part of the responsibility of an astrologer is to reveal the person's karma, or whatever you'd like to call it, to them, or a reflection of them to them, but in a way that must be useful in a positive way to them. I won't fake it and just only tell them good stuff, or it's not about that. I don't mean that. I mean just in the sense that if you're going to look at your karma, sometimes they call it astro genes. I mean, any word will do. Whatever this is, then there's got to be a good reason to. There isn't clearly any sense of this is your doom, take it or leave it. There would never be a good reason for that. And astrology is not probably capable of that any more than it's capable of perfect accuracy about what's fantastic about our lives. Astrology is a model, and it's largely human made, so it could never be perfectly right. So given those things, its only usefulness must be to benefit people. And for me, the benefit is to try and give them a sense of greater control over their own lives. But what they will encounter is that from the charts, I'll talk a lot more about specific things. I'll go as far as saying things like, the traditional stuff, whether they will have children or not, what will be the type of person they marry or whatever, as it comes up or not, of course, while giving them advice that I guess is unmistakably still related to the humanist psychologist in me, and obviously still coming from the chart. So I've got a way always of putting it in a constructive way to ensure that they never feel a victim, and they always feel capable of doing something about it, even if sometimes it's only a small thing. But I find empowering people that way is a very positive experience when they walk away, but not a false one of being inflated by you're great and fabulous and talented, but more that in the sense that there's something I can do to feel a bit more in charge of my life.
Right. So how does that reconcile with the Vedic perspective of being able to tell, for example, about children or the spouse? How do you convey that with giving them enough room to negotiate or co-create?
Well, one of the things I tell them, which is in fact Vedic, is the traditional definition of karma, which we have so wrong in our Western world. As usual, we've appropriated it and westernized it, and it's turned into punishment and reward, which is like the Western system of religion. But actually, the easiest way to simplify it in Vedic culture is that there are three strengths of karma. There are those things that cannot be changed. There are those things that can be changed with difficulty, and there are those things that can be changed with ease. So if you think about it, that means in that little simplification, 2/3 of things are changeable, and to a greater or lesser extent. And the purpose of the chart is to identify which ones are worth working on it, which is most of the stuff in our lives. So which ones are, and then using astrology, as I was saying, to construct positive ways that are still true to this chart with these planets, that's more likely to be responsive to their will, co-creativity, taking charge of their lives, as we've called it, because the chart's saying you do have some room there. And with the stuff that you can't, so the other side of the tradition is in the West, when I was, when my father died and my family called a rabbi in, because we didn't really have our own rabbi. We weren't a very religious family. And so my brothers called this rabbi in, and my one brother started bragging that I'd written a book on astrology. And the rabbi at first was a little perplexed, and he said, no, we believe in God. And I said, no, but Jewish people are supposed to have astrology. They got it from the Babylonians. So he went off to the chief rabbi to ask. And the chief rabbi came back with, according to the writings, if someone has the ability to read God's intentions in the sky, he has an obligation to tell other people what God is saying. And the purpose of God saying anything at all is not to say this will happen to you or that will happen to you, but is to rather say, here are the parameters that you're working with. Here are the bounds, the walls of my garden that I've made down there. What you do inside there is up to you. But if you understand where the bounds are, you won't bang your head against the wall and try and do things, change things that can't be changed, and rather concentrate on the ones you can. And if you make those all of your life, it's 100% in your hands. And leave the ones that can't be changed to me. God, fate, karma, genes, whatever you want to call it. So it's that approach where I'm trying to say, even with the stuff you cannot change, the positive value is knowing which ones you can't. And there's no strong focus on that, but depending on their age, they're experienced enough to know what part of our life feels like the part that we're not in control of, like the stuff that happens to us, as opposed to how we then respond to it, which is in our hands and is the changeable stuff. And that's why what's empowering is that the bit that comes from me is the changeable stuff. The stuff that happens to me, which astrology can also talk about, isn't really changeable, but the rest feels like all of it to me. So that's where we're trying to take that.
Thank you for that. That's really insightful. So going back to the third, and this is my final question on this, but going back to the third that can't be changed, is there a formula in the chart? Is it more a planet, a particular placement? Is it a transit? How would you read that as what they can't negotiate with?
I'd say it's a combination of two things. One of them is that there must be, and this is the most important one, there must be a number of different, maybe even unrelated, not always, a number of different things in the chart that all say the same about it, that all could be read pretty much the same way. The other thing, hopefully as well, is that whatever it is that we're talking about is also angular, or it's the rule of an angle, which is kind of like saying as close to definite as we get in astrology. So between those two things, we can assume that, listen, this is you're dealing with, but how you deal with is still a lot up to you.
Right. Thank you. Thanks for that. So are you, with all the different approaches you've had, do you encompass the outer planets, some of the asteroids? What do you use in your charts?
I use what I would call in the 20th century word traditional, the 10 traditionals, in other words, the visible planets plus Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Or, oh, we're speaking in English, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. I have American students, I can't say Uranus. I don't know, in South Africa, that's the word. I think in England, that's the word as well, isn't it?
Indeed. So, and what about Chiron, Astro,
So,
anything else that you?
Chiron, so although my own Chiron is very pertinent, so I know from experience the relevance of it. And in fact, I've had fascinating conversations with Melanie Reinhardt about it as well. I don't automatically use it in someone's chart. I classify it as one of the asteroids. And so the asteroids, like I guess with many things, I go through phases of using them, although there's some things I might notice or might be curious about, as it were, by chance. But so like the same would go for midpoints. There are many modern things in astrology which I find greatly useful, but often have the problem, all of them, of almost being additional astrologies as opposed to just additional things in a chart. So it's like, well, why choose that asteroid? You should use a whole bunch of asteroids. You can't be selective, then you're choosing what you're going to say about them, really. And the same goes for the midpoints, and there's like, 90 major ones of those or whatever. I do teach all of those things in my class, and I try and teach people strategies for using them. But in the end, for myself, I use the 10 planets popular in the 20th century, excluding Chiron, who did become very popular here in South Africa. I do make use of the nodes in a somewhat traditional way, and I make use of some stars and some asteroids as my very basic natal things. Asteroids, as I say, in phases. Other than what made me maybe use asteroids less was Arabic parts, which Zola is very big on, and he wrote a whole book on them. And that's proved very useful in helping determine, is this a changeable thing or not, as one of the pieces of evidence.
And is there one bit of advice that you give? I'm sure you give a lot of advice to your students in terms of how to approach charts. Is there one that's particularly you find yourself repeating every term, every year to them, something about approaching client work themselves?
Well, I do repeat the do no harm thing often, because what happens with students or beginners, is sometimes when they suddenly find themselves on the spot, they only know how to say the Pluto is on your sun thing, and they drop a bomb. And so you've got to sometimes got to keep on reminding that. And the thing I do say every term is never say to your client, nobody really understands you, because everyone agrees to that statement, and it creates this false sense of, but you, the astrologer, are special, I'm going to understand you, and don't put yourself in that position. I find it necessary, or maybe I think it's necessary to say that.
Right. Or reinforcing that the astrologer won't either, perhaps as well.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Okay,
Indeed.
well, I haven't heard that before, but I totally understand. And also people are ready to elevate astrologers to guru status.
Exactly.
And without ever taking responsibility themselves. Well,
Yes,
thank you. Thank you so much for that. In the next session, we're going to have a look at how you approach a chart and how you articulate that. So thanks for being with us. Thank you, Rod. Okay.